You're listening to the Infinite Banking Mastery Podcast. Did you know that you could build a tax-free pool of wealth that's liquid and accessible all your life while building your retirement nest egg? Gain full control of your financial future and stop relying on the government and banks. The wealthy have already discovered this wealth-building secret. Now it's your turn to get financially secure without following the conventional wisdom that keeps you in debt to banks. Now here's your host, Valerie LaRocque.
Hello, welcome to Infinite Banking Mastery. Thank you for being here. I thought I would start today with a story about a very close client of mine. Called me about a week ago, very excited. He said, hey, I knew my premium was due soon. So I looked at my account. I wanted to make sure it was credited correctly or, make sure that the payment was credited. So I looked at my account online and saw that my net account cash value was at $10,000. Then I called in and paid my premium of $3,000. And then a few days later, I watched as my account value went up to $15,000. Like I made $2,000. He was so excited just watching his account go up by $2,000 more than the premium payment amount he had just sent in. And I said, yes, that's exactly what I've been trying to share, teach, what I've been trying to help you understand that will happen as the years go by. This exciting thing that happens as you make your premium payments, your cash value will go up by more and more and more than the amount that you just paid in. It gets better every year. That's why the policy gets better with age. And so now he's starting to recognize that. He could see it plainly and clearly, and it was very exciting for both of us. So I thought that would be a fun story to share and start off with. Now, the title of this podcast, Do What Rich People Do. Why did I call it that? Well, because buying whole life insurance is one of those things. So I thought that that would be a perfect name for this podcast, just talking about some of the things that these wealthy people do. So for example, many famous entrepreneurs have borrowed against their whole life policies, the cash value in their whole life policies, to either start their business, grow their business, or save their business. I have some examples, a few different examples of that. So we have Walt Disney back in 1953. He borrowed against his whole life policy because no banker would lend to him to start Disneyland or his whole plan with Disney. No banker trusted him and wanted to lend money. So thankfully for him, he had already built up cash values inside of his whole life policy. So he was able to borrow against those to begin Disneyland. I'm sure we're all grateful for that. I love Disneyland. We went to Disney World just about a year ago. The kids, we had a great time. I'm so glad that Walt Disney was able to open his dream. Another example, we have JCPenney. In the 1929 stock market crash, JCPenney borrowed against his whole life policies to meet the company payroll so that he could keep his company going and they didn't go under. Pampered Chef, that was Doris Christopher, and she launched her company back in 1980 with a $3,000 life insurance loan. She launched her company and ended up selling to Warren Buffett for an amount we don't totally know. Sounds like it was around, or reportedly, about $900 million. So huge win for her and Pampered Chef. I actually love Pampered Chef. I think they have a lot of great products. And then another company would be something everybody knows, McDonald's. Ray Kroc, he accessed his whole life to pay key employees and also to fund and begin his branding campaign, Ronald McDonald. So he was able to launch that and really run with that, the Ronald McDonald, and be able to pay and keep his business going so that he could really create an empire. And so also Foster Farms, they also have used their life insurance policy loans. So I'm sure many of you have heard Tony Robbins. I'm sure many of you have heard of Tony Robbins. He wrote a book called Money, Master the Game. And there's a chapter in that book called Secrets of the Ultra Wealthy that you can use too. And in that book, he calls the strategy that I am passionate about teaching, that this whole podcast is called Infinite Banking. He calls this strategy the rich man's Roth. I think that's a great name for it, actually. And so he says, and I'm going to quote, "Believe it or not, the ultra wealthy do indeed buy astronomical amounts of life insurance. But it's not the billionaires who buy the most. The biggest buyers are banks and large corporations, from Walmart to Wells Fargo. Now, if you want to look into that, you can Google it. You can Google BOLI. That stands for bank-owned life insurance. And that's just banks have been buying tons of life insurance for years. Back in 2020, the total BOLI assets, bank-owned life insurance assets, were over $182 billion. Billion with a B. That's cash value inside of whole life contracts that's considered part of their Tier 1 capital. A Tier 1 capital is a bank's core capital. Really, it's the primary measure of a bank's financial strength. There are many banks that a sizable portion of their Tier 1 capital is the cash value in their permanent life insurance contracts. So now in the book, Tony Robbins, he's calling this strategy private placement life insurance. And then he says that the New York Times has called it the secret of the affluent. Now, there are many agents and advisors out there and marketing, all sorts of marketing going on, that people calling it different things. There's all sorts of different names for infinite banking. Some are calling it banking with life, bank on yourself. Here we have private placement life insurance. There are a lot of different ways that people are calling this just for their own marketing. They're just naming it something different. But originally, it was created and the name was put out there by Nelson Nash, who wrote Becoming Your Own Banker. And he called it the infinite banking concept. And so any other form of that really stems from Nelson Nash and what he first wrote about to teach the masses about this strategy. So as Tony points out in this chapter that I'm going over, The Secrets of the Ultra Wealthy, he does point out that you don't have to be someone who's ultra wealthy to utilize this strategy or to take advantage of this type of account. So who can do this? Well, really, anybody. Anybody can do this. You just need to be insurable. I mean, we just have to check for your insurability. And then really from there, it's just dependent on your budget and then what makes the most sense to move forward, what looks like the best strategy for you, and how best to build a contract based on your ability to fund a contract. You can have policies on your children, your parents. So, we have policies on a lot of our family. And so anyone can do this. And in the book too, he goes over some of the benefits. Here's the benefits as Tony Robbins lists them in his book. The first one he lists is that there are unlimited deposit amounts with no income limitations. There are essentially no income limitations. So you can fund these contracts with any amount you want, basically. Secondly, he puts that there is no tax on the growth of your investments, which is a big deal and what we've been talking about in previous episodes. No tax is a big deal. There's also no tax when accessed, if structured correctly and accessed correctly. So you have this vehicle that you can save into that's going to grow with guarantees, and that growth is accessible, income tax-free all your life. And then the fourth point he makes is that any money left over for your heirs cannot be taxed. So your beneficiaries will eventually receive the death benefit income tax-free. In his book, The Wall Street Journal said, or he put this excerpt from the Wall Street Journal in his book that says, because the investments are held within an insurance wrapper, gains inside the policy are shielded from income tax, as is the payout upon death. What's more, policyholders may be able to access their money during their lifetimes by withdrawing or borrowing funds. So there's the Wall Street Journal, their way of saying the same thing that I just went over. And so there you have it. Things that the rich do, and backed up by the well-known Tony Robbins and the Wall Street Journal. So I want to thank you for listening in today. As always, if you're interested in learning how this strategy could work for you or help your family, how you might be able to fund something like this, please reach out, get on my calendar. We can set up an appointment for a consultation. Again, I always recommend reading Becoming Your Own Banker by Nelson Nash. It's the best way to get a foundational understanding. If you want to reach out, my email is valerie@alphaomegawealth.com. Next week, our podcast will be covering how banks make money. You don't want to miss it. We'll see you next time.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.